Welcome back to the daily Kitzur Shulchan Aruch Shir. We have begun to study the laws of brachas made before eating or drinking or enjoying fragrances. So that means we're in the section that deals with brachas. It's quite a large section. It has about 13, 14 Simanim, chapters. We learned about Habaytzi and Vizaydas. We learned about wine. And now we're learning on making brachas before we eat, drink, and smell wonderful fragrances. So yesterday we started with the general idea of brachas, why we make brachas. And we explained that really since Hashem created the world, everything belongs to Hashem, which means that everything is holy. And just as a person would not be allowed to use the menorah in the temple in order to lighten up his dining room table because it's holy, it's only used for the mitzvah, so the whole world really is something that we don't have permission to touch unless we make a bracha. When we make a bracha, then through that bracha, we, so to speak, redeem it so that we too can benefit from it. It's a form of also, it's referred to as asking Hashem for permission to eat whatever we're about to eat. And we make a bracha before eating even the slightest amount of food. We spoke about the bracha of Shahakol Diyam Midvarai, that everything is made by Hashem's words, and how that's an all-inclusive bracha, which ideally should only be used for foods that don't have a more personalized bracha. But if a person made Shahakol on any food, then after the fact, that will work. But at the outset, if you're not sure which bracha to make, rather find out. Then we spoke about how whatever we're eating needs to actually be in our hands. And it needs that, if it's not in your hands, it needs to at least be in front of you. If it wasn't in front of you when you made the bracha, if it wasn't yet in the room, then you'd actually have to make another bracha. Alternatively, if it fell out of your hands and it was lost, then you would have to make a bracha on whatever else you're eating, unless you had in mind to eat them both. And then at the end, Sachi asked, sometimes there's a known thing that you could, even half an hour or more, 72 minutes, sometimes even longer than that, after a person made a bracha, they don't need to make another bracha, provided that they're not hungry again. So I explained that a bracha needs to have a landing. What that means is that when you make the bracha, before anything happens, that bracha needs to land on the mitzvah or the food that you're eating. Once you've eaten something, then the bracha has landed, it's grounded, and then now it will stay with you until you decide that you're done or your eating session expires. It's kind of like if you want to log into your online banking. So originally you got to put in a password and this and that. It's a bit of a process. But then once you're in, as long as you're still active, you can keep it going all day. But if you're not active for more than a couple of minutes, then the page expires and then you need to re-log in. So when we make a bracha, it's like we're logging into Hashem's world. And when we make that bracha, it needs to have a landing, just like when you log in and you get a message on your phone and you need to authorize. If you don't do that whole process, then the login process is futile. You need to take it to the end. And once you've fully logged in, then you don't need to do much at all. You just need to be active. So the same thing with brachas. Originally, when you make a bracha, you need to have your ducks in a line. Meaning, before you start making the bracha, know which bracha you're going to make. Make sure you're making the right bracha. Hold the item in your hand. At least have it in the room. And if the bracha lands, it's done right, then as long as you're still active, meaning as long as you're still eating, or you're not feeling hungry once again, or you haven't decided to log out, you haven't decided that you're done eating, then you don't need to go ahead and make another bracha. Okay, that's a good question. Somebody's asked if a person needs to use the washroom. So when they come back after using the washroom, would they need to make another bracha? Was that the question? So no, as long as you're still in the middle of eating, then the session is not closed. Just as if you're in the middle of banking and you needed to quickly run to the bathroom, as long as you're back within enough time, then you don't need to log in again. Your banking session will continue to be active online. So even if you go to the bathroom, that's not considered you haven't finished your meal, you're just taking a break. On the other hand, if you decide that you're done and you log out, then even if you don't make an after bracha, if you decide that you're done eating, then you will need to make another bracha. Okay. So we're talking about the bracha having a landing. It's just, when you're trying to log in, you need quite a bit of concentration to make sure everything's lined up. You've got your cell phone next to you so that you can approve the login on your phone, and you're putting in the password, and you need to check that everything's in sync. And then if something happens in the middle, then you got to start all over. If your phone isn't next to you, and then you got to start putting in your password. It's the same thing with the bracha. The moment a person makes a bracha, they need to immediately eat something. Okay. If a person waits more than a few seconds between making the bracha and actually eating, then again, the bracha doesn't land. It's in bracha in vain, and you'll need to restart. The difference between internet banking and a bracha is the internet banking, you have nothing to lose if you need to log in again. You've just lost a few seconds of your time. But if you make a bracha, that bracha doesn't work because you didn't have your ducks in line, then that's actually a sin. It's mentioning God's name in vain. It's a very serious sin. So you got to make sure to do it right. So doing it right means that the moment you make the bracha, you eat right away. Nothing gets in the way between making a bracha and eating. But you shouldn't wait for, he says, even longer than longer than the amount of time it takes to make a short greeting. Shalom alecha Rebbe. The moment you make the bracha, you eat. Even while chewing, until you've swallowed, you can't speak. You can't make any interruption. That's all part of that landing. When you imagine when you're trying to log in to the banking, and then a guy wants to come and start talking to you, and if he does that, you're going to lose track. You're going to have to start again. So same thing. If you make a bracha, the guy wants to start. Just typically, let's say you're at a bracha in shul, or you're at a buffet, whatever it is. You're at an event, and two guys, and you have a cup of. I want to talk about chewing something. So I guess it's not good to talk while you have food in your mouth. So that should cover you. But anyhow, if you make a bracha and you take a piece of whatever it is, biltong or something that needs to be chewed on, and meanwhile somebody asks you, I don't know, what's the time or cheers, and you just say like, cheers, you've just lost your bracha, because the bracha only lands once you've swallowed. As long as you haven't yet swallowed, the bracha hasn't yet landed. So that's very important.
So what do you do if you have a chewing gum?
That's a good question. There's a question if you make a bracha on chewing gum.
You have to make shakol ni'abidvaro.
So the question is what the benefit is that you're having, because if you're not swallowing actually, then you don't make it's not considered benefit if you don't swallow. But it could be that when you have chewing gum, you immediately swallow some of the sugar. I think that's what happens. I think when you start chewing, you wet it, and then you swallow the sugar.
Same like a sweet. You suck it until it disappears, no?
So, yeah, a sweet, I think, is even more of a question, because chewing gum, it's soft, so you could immediately swallow that sugar. But if it's a hard sweet, it might take a little bit of time till you loosen it up. So, therefore, if you're having a hard sweet, like those Ricola sweets, then you shouldn't make a bracha on the sweet, because you might be unable to speak for a very long time when you're busy eating it so that you can speak because your throat hurts. So you rather eat something else that has the same bracha, shehakol, whatever it is, whether it be a mushroom or anything that's shehakol. And when you make the shehakol, you'll be making it on both the other thing and the Ricola sweet. I was going to say just make a shehakol on a cup of water. But a cup of water actually is not considered benefit unless either you're thirsty, or if somebody just is not thirsty at all and they just drink a cup of water to take down medicine, then it's actually not considered benefit because it doesn't have any taste to it. Water's tasteless. But if you're thirsty We'll learn this. We'll learn this probably very soon. If you're thirsty, then you have to make a bracha.
You don't make bracha?
Pardon?
On occasion, you don't make bracha?
No. It's not the type of benefit. You're benefiting in the long run because it's going to make you feel better, but it doesn't meet the criteria of food as far as benefiting from food. So you don't make it unless it has like sugar and you enjoy the sugar. So if you have medication that's like in the form of, homeopathics, they have those little white pills, they're sugar, and then they just coat it with the homeopathy. So then you would make a bracha on the sugar if you like the sugar. So if you are anyhow thirsty and you need to be drinking more, then the simple solution is to take a cup of water, make a bracha shakol diyamid vara on the water, provided that you are also thirsty, and have in mind that the shahakol is not just on the cup of water, but it's on the ricola sweet as well, or it's on the homeopathy as well. Or doesn't need to be a cup of water, anything that has the bracha of shahakol. Okay, now if a person did speak between making the bracha and eating, so if it was unrelated to the meal, then you'll have to repeat the bracha, because as I said, the bracha had no landing. If you paused longer than you should have, but you didn't actually speak, then that still works. If it's a delay which is necessary for eating, then it's not considered an interruption. So for example, if you want to eat a large fruit, which needs to be cut up into small pieces, then you can make the bracha while it's still whole, and that actually makes the bracha more special because you've got a whole fruit in front of you. And then cut it up. And although it might take you a couple of seconds till you cut it up, that's not considered an interruption. It's part of the eating process. Okay. So that's that. But if you want to eat a fruit, and you're worried that there's worms inside, then obviously you'll first need to open it up, because if there's worms, then you won't be able to eat it all together, and then the bracha will be in vain. Okay, so in summary, what we've said in halacha number 5 was that make sure that your bracha has a landing by swallowing right away after you make that bracha. So back to the scenario, if you are at this engagement party and there's somebody that's walking around with little hot dog buns, and you make a little bracha on the hot dog bun, and the person starts asking you or continues talking to you, and you say, can you repeat that? Don't say anything from when you put it into your mouth until you've swallowed. I'm sure we'll say it soon, but another important halacha is that you also need to swallow in the same place that you made the bracha, which means practically you can't start eating but in general, you've heard from me on numerous occasions that it's not a good idea to eat while you're walking. If you want to eat like a mensch, you'll sit down and eat like a mensch. But if you do eat while you're walking, then you need to stop a second when you start eating, because you want to make sure that you eat at the same place that you made the bracha. But if you're going to make the bracha while you're walking, then from when you finish making the bracha until you actually swallow, you're already in a different place. So the bracha didn't manage to have a landing. So I imagine he'll say it inside, but just in case he doesn't, I wanted to mention that as well. Part of the bracha having a landing means that you stay put in one place from when you make the bracha until you go ahead and you actually eat. Halacha number 6. Okay, this is an interesting one. Some people are particular that anytime they drink water, they first spill a little bit out, because they worry that maybe there's something dangerous on the surface of the water. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but you have certain Jews, anytime they drink a cup of water, they first just tip out a little bit of water before they drink. So he says you should do that before you start making the bracha, because again, you want to minimize any interruption. You want to make sure that you have as little an interruption as possible. Okay. So here's back to your question about chewing gum, Moshe. If you tasted food, not because you wanted to eat, but because you're in the kitchen, and you want to know, does it need some more salt? And you're not actually going to swallow it at all. So you just put it into your mouth and you feel, whatever it is that you're making, is it well spiced? So as long as you're not going to swallow, as I mentioned before, no bracha is required. If you swallow, even if you do swallow, if the only reason you're swallowing is in order to feel the texture as part of the cooking process, then it's a question. It's a question whether or not you need to make a bracha. On the one hand, you did swallow, but on the other hand, you weren't trying to eat. So therefore, if you're gonna taste something and you're gonna swallow, have in mind that you're not just tasting it; you'll enjoy it as well. And then that way, there's no question on the bracha. So there we go. If you want to get a head start, you could blame it on the bracha. Okay. And now back to what we discussed earlier. We already mentioned it outside. If you're eating or drinking for medicinal purposes, if you enjoy it, then you make a bracha. Even if it's non-kosher food, usually you're not allowed to make. If a person eats non-kosher, then they're not allowed to make a bracha on that because it's just a contradiction in terms. You say, "Thank you, Hashem, for giving this to me," and Hashem did not give it to you. You shouldn't be touching it. It's like, imagine if a guy steals your car and he says, "Oh, thank you so much for allowing me to use your car. I didn't let you use my car. What are you thanking me for?" No, thank you. Thank you, not well received. So if a person is going to take non-kosher food, which Hashem says we're not allowed to eat, and he's going to say, "Thank you, Hashem, for the food." What are you thanking me for? Don't eat it. You don't have permission. However, if a person is eating for medicinal purposes, meaning that for health, they have to have it for their health, for their well-being, then they can make a bracha even though it's not kosher, because at that point it becomes kosher for them.
Pikuach nefesh.
Yeah, pikuach nefesh. So I guess if somebody on Yom Kippur needs to eat to save a life, even though you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, he is allowed to eat on Yom Kippur to save a life. So therefore he would make a bracha on the food that he was eating. However, back to medicine, if the medicine does not taste good, and the only reason you're eating it is because you have to, and some people come up with these concoctions of drinking grass or all types of things that are not very tasty, but they're disciplined and they do it. They put the grass into the blender, and then they drink the grass. And as far as I'm aware, if I remember correctly, it tastes pretty bad. So even though you're having a cup of a nice drink, if it's distasteful and you're just drinking it for your health, then you won't make a bracha. If you drink a raw egg in order to make your voice clear, up until today, I don't know if it's a myth or it's not a myth, ask your local cantor, but there's an old story that Chazanim, in order to be able to sing well, eat a raw egg. They say that helps them be able to sing or speak. So if somebody does that, he says, you're not going to enjoy the taste, but you do enjoy the nourishment. And so you would make a bracha, meaning, I guess the egg maybe also helps the person become more somewhat nourished. In other words, if you're eating a food that you don't like, but it's your supper, then of course you make a bracha. If you don't like potatoes and you eat potatoes, you make a bracha. You don't have to actually enjoy the taste. You need to just be benefiting from it, unless it's for medicinal purposes. If you're just eating it for medical reasons, then you don't make a bracha unless you enjoy the taste. But if you're eating it because you're hungry, then even if you do not enjoy the taste, you still are benefiting from it, and you will make a bracha. That brings us to the end of today's class. Thank you so much for joining. Wishing you a wonderful Shabbos. Please God to be continued with some more super practical halachas next week. Please God,